We'll begin today by just going around the room, maybe just kind of introduce them, and everybody can introduce themselves. This is going to be a class where every Thursday night, hopefully we'll all get to have some good chats about all the stuff we're going to read, and we'll all get to know each other pretty well. And this should be a class where nobody feels too shy to speak up. This is definitely a class where I will take a back seat. Right? I'm going to let you guys lead the class a lot of the time. So, unlike English 101, which is mostly a class where I talk, right? 102 is definitely much more of a discussion class. So this is going to be, so again, this will be a class where everybody should get to know each other, feel comfortable. So I guess I'll start with introductions. Maybe all of you guys can just tell just a little bit about yourself. What are you here doing here at Southern? What are your plans, your career aspirations? Maybe you can tell us, some of you guys can tell us about what do you do for fun? If you're a reader, what kind of stuff do you like to read? So you guys can share any amount of details you want. My name is Jeff Yeager, obviously, so many of you already know me. I'm the instructor of the course. So I've been here at Southern for 4 years. I previously taught for WU in Concord. I actually got my doctoral degree at WU, so I spent several years there. Wyoming County guy originally. I grew up in Wyoming County. Now I teach at the Wyoming County campus. So I kind of had a homecoming when I got hired for Southern, which was great. Other stuff, I'm a big sports person. I love baseball and football. My baseball team won the World Series this year with the Braves. My football team's also still in it, the 49ers, and we're still in the hunt too. So we beat the Packers last week, which made me quite happy. Yeah, I love to do a bunch of stuff. I'm obviously a big reader. I love movies. I also teach the movie appreciation class here at Southern. You need an art class in the future. That's a good one to do. Well, that's all I will say. I will stop talking. I'm looking at the participants list over here on the side of the screen. I guess we can kind of go down the list. I see Elise Cyrus is first up. Well, there's 4 of you over there, so I guess all 4 of you can introduce yourselves.
You can go. Okay. My name's Brandon Atkins, and I'm a senior at Lincoln County High School. And I'm taking this to get college credit before I graduate.
What other classes have you taken for college credit? I know you had my 101.
Yeah,
We're in
the
the
101.
speech.
Yeah, we're in speech.
And the orientation.
Yeah, we took orientation too.
Good.
On your path, right?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
took
I'm in
math.
math.
All
Someone
right.
else see what their name is.
I have Aaliyah Cyrus. I'm a senior too. I want to go to WVU. I don't really know what I want to do yet though. And I don't really do. I'm a cheerleader, but I don't really do anything else.
Good.
I could go.
Okay, I'll go.
I'm Bailey Atkins. I'm a senior as well. I'm probably going to go to WVU and major in forensics. I'm not a teacher. I'm just pretty lazy, honestly. But in like a lot of AP and honors classes.
I'm Kylie Atkins. I'm also a senior from Lincoln County High School. I'm taking this class to get credits too. I play basketball and soccer. And yeah, I want to go into radiology.
All Are some of you guys related? All you Atkinses up there?
No, we're
No,
not related.
Everyone just has the same last name.
Everyone has the same name here.
Yeah.
It's a name like Cook is in Wyoming County, right? There's all kinds of Cooks in our county. So,
The whole school.
Yeah, the whole school.
good. Glad to meet you all face to face. Definitely enjoyed having you all last semester.
Yeah.
Audrey is next.
Yeah. Audrey, ready for
Hello? I think, is it working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. I'm Audrey Vance. Hello. I've taken, what was it called? I took the orientation class, and that's all I took. I don't know. I run track and cross country, and then I also played volleyball. That's about all I got.
Are you a Lincoln County person too?
Oh yeah,
Good.
I do. I'm a senior there.
Good. Your name seems familiar, Audrey. Did I have you for class before? Your name's familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, you were with the group last semester too, I think, if I remember.
Yeah.
Very good. Glad to meet you officially.
Yeah.
Aiden,
Hello.
see you there, Aiden.
Howdy. Okay, I guess I gotta talk about myself. Sorry. I'm a senior too at LCHS. I think I'm gonna become a physical therapist assistant, and I saw on the little roster thing that I'd probably need this class. I had you last semester for English 101, and I had orientation. And I do a lot of running sports, cross country, track. I play soccer. I like bees.
I remember you wrote about the bees last semester, didn't you?
Yeah, I got into beekeeping, so it's kind of my little hobby.
Yeah, that's a cool hobby. And bees are, yeah, there's lots of discussion with like environmentalists, right, who are talking about how bees are dying out a lot. So
Yeah, mine sure are good at it.
it's a bit of a scary thought.
It is, man.
Yeah,
That's about all there is to me that I can think of.
good to meet you, Aiden. I'm guessing all of you guys probably already know each other pretty well since you all go to the same high school. So. All right.
Hi, Kylie.
Hey, Aiden.
Hey, Bailey.
Hey, Aiden.
Yeah, so-
Hi, Audrey. She's over there somewhere too. Not in that group, but
You guys can come next time.
You guys can come sit with us all next time.
no, man. I'm chilling at my house. I got it all. I got all the amenities here. So
That's right. I'm wearing pajama pants. I'm not gonna lie, at my house right now. So I look official with my nice little sweater, right? Underneath.
I'm sitting in the camping chair.
That's cool. I look like
I wish I was wearing pajamas.
All right, now we got some Mr. Dante. So Dante's a Wyoming County guy. So introduce yourself to us, Dante.
Well, my name's Dante Brooks, and it's my second semester at Southern, and I like sports and video games, I guess. Yeah.
What kind of games are you into, Dante?
Sport games.
I used to be a big Madden player, but I kind of fell off past few years.
Yeah, I play that sometimes.
Mostly a FIFA or a 2K kind of guy.
Yeah, I don't really play FIFA.
Yeah, glad to have you again, Dante. Glad that you came back for some more punishment. Dante was in my live class last semester, so Ethan's next.
This is my second semester at Southern, and I plan to transfer to WVU Tech to do electrical engineering, and I box, and that's about it.
Yeah, I remember I enjoyed your narrative paper about boxing last semester, Ethan.
Yeah.
There's a lot of WVU folks here, WVU Tech or WVU. I'm glad to hear that. I'm a WVU mark, obviously. So, Gabe,
I'm Gabe Bates. I have for 101, and I'm also a Lincoln County boy. I'm with everybody else here. I play football and baseball, and I'm not a big reader.
well, I'll change that. I'll change
Yeah.
that.
We'll see about that one.
I'll whip you into shape. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gabe's a very good writer. Gabe was in that group last semester too. So yeah, he's a very good writer. So all you guys up there at Lincoln County are sharp. They must be doing something right in that high school up there. Most of the time I complain about how awful the high schools are. So that's the biggest compliment I can give. So Jessica, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jessica Edwards. I'm 38 years old. I am a Mingo County resident. I'm a mother of three. I work full-time. I'm a site coordinator for Coalfield Community Action Partnership in Williamson. I love to read. I like to read the Bible, the Strange and Unusual. I like to do crafts. I do a lot of sewing. Pretty much all the old people things. That's what I do. I was born in a time without technology, so I have had to learn because of work. And other than that, I'm not really big of a fan of it.
Yeah, good to meet you, Jessica. My wife's a Mingo County girl. She grew up well, she's technically on the Kentucky side. She grew up in Belfry. But,
oh, that's not too far away.
So, yeah, I know about all there is to know about that area, considering she's from there. So, of course, I had some really good friends from Gilbert too. So, yeah, welcome, Jessica. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Did I already get Jordan Brooks? I don't think so.
No.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay. My name's Jordan. I am a Wyoming County resident. I live at the bottom of the mountain from where the school is. Raised actually here. I'm a mother of one little 6-year-old boy. I've been married since I was 17. I've bounced in and out of Southern while trying to work as a nurse. I got my nursing degree through Wyoming County Technical College down in Pineville. I got my LPN and I've worked for 7 years through them through Genesis, and I decided to go back and get my RN, and this is a required course for that.
Yeah, glad to have you, Jordan. I think this is my first time having you in class. Am I wrong in saying that?
Well, the last time I was enrolled was in 2013, so it's been a while.
Yeah, so glad to have you, Jordan. Yeah, I have lots of RN students coming through Wyoming campus. But good, welcome. Mackenzie Bolts.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yep.
All right. I'm Mackenzie Bolts and I go to Lincoln County High School. I was in your class last semester and after high school, I plan to go to Bridge Valley and become a sonographer, do ultrasounds and everything. And I like to read. I love books of any kind. And I like writing. That's basically it about me.
Good. Yeah, I remember we had a little chat on email over the break about your reading. So
Yeah.
yeah, so glad to have you here, Mackenzie.
I'm glad to be in the class.
So Megan's next.
Hi, my name's Megan Stanley. I'm a senior at Lincoln County High School. I was also in your 101 class last semester. I love to read.
We can barely hear you, Megan.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay, I'm a senior at LC, Lincoln County High School. I was in your English class last semester. I also love to read, mostly fiction, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's glad to have you back, Megan. Hopefully all of y'all like horror stories, right? Considering that's what the class is all about. So hopefully y'all are into that. So Paige is next.
Hi everybody, my name's Amriana, but I go by Paige. I'm 25. I love to paint and read and spend time with my animals. I have a lot of animals. I plan on going into counseling. Huh?
Are you a cat person or a dog person?
Cat.
Good person. Good person.
Yes.
Me too.
I love cats. I have 10.
So you like to paint, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm glad to have you here. Glad to have you aboard.
It's good to be here.
I think that's everybody, because everybody else logged in here is in the group of 4 over there. So yeah, glad to have everybody here. Glad to have everybody aboard. So I'll ask you guys this: how far are you guys in the reading? Did you guys read the Poe stuff for today? Are you guys ready to chat about Poe? Or would you prefer me to do more like introductory type stuff today? What I kind of planned for both. So you guys ready to discuss Poe, or do you want to hold that off? What? How are you guys feeling? Telltale Heart. Yeah. Go ahead. Have you guys done the reading? That's what I'm asking. Because if not, okay, yeah, Mackenzie's saying yes.
I've done all the readings.
Okay, good. So we can go ahead and start talking about the readings then. Well, we can also mention some Sleepy Hollow too, since that was the first week reading of the week. So that's going to be what the class is going to be the first few weeks. It's mostly short stories. We're going to start out doing lots of these short stories. And then about week 6, we're going to segue over into novels and novellas. which the novella is pretty much just a small novel. So yeah, we're going to cover a pretty good amount of stuff. So Poe is usually the most popular author that I talk about in here. Poe's just universally popular. Everybody loves some Edgar Allan Poe. It doesn't really matter if you like other kinds of horror stories or not. Everybody's into some Poe. I think that's mostly because he's taught a lot in high schools, right? So even middle school, he's taught a lot. So when I pick my selections, I usually try to pick some selections that lots of times I don't think students probably read in that level. Telltale Heart's usually a popular one, but Black Cat, I don't think many people read Black Cat in high school. So I usually try to pick some stuff you guys probably aren't familiar with. So yeah, before we get involved with talking about Poe, just some quick introductory material. So before we start our discussion, I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about literary studies in general, because whenever we talk about literature, like one thing that I always like to do before we do anything else is actually talk about the field of literature, like what kind of stuff is being discussed about literature. What are some approaches to even thinking about literature? So as I go over these, maybe think to yourself, which one of these most applies to me, right? Do you think you would be interested in reading about literature and history together, for instance, or literature in the environment, or literature and psychology? So literature is a field that absorbs almost any other kind of field you can take. So it's a field that almost everyone can bring their own interest to. Okay, and this is an especially important thing to talk about on the first day, because later in class, whenever you guys will do your papers, your final papers close to the end, I'm actually going to ask you to look at one of these books of literature we're reading, maybe take your own angles to it. So like maybe you might read Frankenstein through a psychology lens, Turn and Screw through a gender lens, or something like that. So I have a little handout here. I'm going to go over this real quick. Then we'll talk some Poe. Let me share the screen here for you. So I use this handout on pretty much all of my lit courses. So in the field of literary studies, what kind of stuff do literature scholars talk about? So this is pretty much just an introductory view to a lot of these schools of thought about how do you approach lit. But the first one here is called biographical approaches. So whenever we're talking about a work of literature, if we take a biographical approach makes the author the main concern and uses the text to illustrate some argument about the author. So I use an example here from another class. You might investigate to what extent John Milton's political life influenced his creation of the devil in Paradise Lost. But this is an approach that we sometimes take if we know a lot about the author, if we know a lot about the author's life. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Most of the authors we're going to read in here, we do know a lot about their lives. Like Poe, we know a lot about his life. We know a lot about Lovecraft's life, Mary Shelley, Henry James. Almost all of their authors we're going to read in here, we know a lot about. So Poe is oftentimes a person that people like to talk about from a biographical approach. Because he's such an interesting guy. He everybody knows that he's kind of a drunk and alcoholic. He liked the opium a lot. He was definitely into that. So, but he also had a lot of personal struggles with things like depression. There's this great love that he had for his cousin, right? He ended up marrying his cousin. So some of you might not know that. So Poe is definitely a writer people like to look at. So whenever you look at a piece of literature, so like maybe like a work of fiction, oftentimes you might like to say, well, this happened in the story because of maybe like what was happening in the author's life at the time the author wrote the story. So that's a pretty common approach to looking at lit. This approach has some, you always kind of have to raise a few flags when you take this approach, because you don't want to think that you know everything there is to know about what was going on through the author's head at the time. Lots of scholars like to divorce the work of lit from the author. So like they like to say, well, this poem means what it means, right? We don't need to know what the author was thinking when the author wrote it. The poem was its own work of art. The poem was its own creation. Some people take that view of art, but that's not to say that you couldn't do a good job if you're interested in biographies, for sure. So this was the first one. You guys feel free to stop me anytime as I sort of work my way through the sheet. If you have any questions about any of these. But the second one, this second one will come up a whole lot in our class on horror, because we oftentimes in horror fiction have a lot of like strange mutilated or strange bodies. Like maybe sometimes like a monster and like a horror story maybe might signify something about the disabled. But over the past 10 years or so, like what are some things that are popular that literature professors are writing papers about? Disability is probably the most hot button issue that you can write about if you're a literature scholar right now. So if some of you guys will later decide to become like an English major, you probably encounter a lot of this in your English, upper level English classes. But what does disability studies do? So one thing that I want to mention, especially about the several approaches, the further we go down the list, disability studies is a very political way of looking at literature. But you look, whenever you do a disability approach, take the body, so discussions about the body, attitudes about the body, like what are some like standard stereotypes we might have about disabled people, for instance, and you take that and use it as a means of advocacy. So for maybe thinking about like better attitudes and that we can think about, we're thinking about the disabled. What are some ways we can break those stereotypes? So lots of times people like to use the lit as a way of showing, hey, here's how things were. Maybe here's how things can be a little better. So several of our characters in the class we will definitely approach from this perspective. Whenever we talk about Frankenstein, especially the creation of that monster in Frankenstein, that will definitely come up there. Like, so we'll ask the question, like, what's so monstrous about the Frankenstein monster? Why is he so horrible, so ugly? Right? So that'll we'll definitely bring this up for that story. It might come up in a couple of other ones too. But if you're especially interested in advocacy work for the disabled, you might start noticing a lot of stuff showing up here. So if you notice something happening in a book like this, make note of it. Think about it. Like, what do you think's going on with the idea of disability showing up in this work of literature? The next one is called Ecological Studies. So this one is definitely a political view looking at lit. But this one looks at nature, especially nature and the environment in lit, like what types of attitudes about how do we treat nature, how do those attitudes show up in a work of lit. So oftentimes those will take the form of environmental advocacy, like what are some better ways that we can treat the environment today. Like how can reading a book maybe help us think about how we treat the land? How do we treat animals? How do we treat the environment? So this one's especially, I know if you go to the WVU Department of English, most of the professors up there are definitely into this, because if we look at our own state, our own state's almost an ecological disaster one after the other, right? Because whenever we talk about, especially about like surface mining and stuff, that kind of destroys the environment whenever you do it. So yeah, this is especially a hot button school of thought here in our state for the various English departments, because a lot of people like to write about that. Okay. But whenever we talk about horror fiction, the environment will come up a lot. Because you might ask yourself, okay, well, why is this setting so spooky? Like, even when we talk about like Sleepy Hollow, why is this setting so spooky? Like, what's scary about it? What's scary about like the dark, foreboding woods? Like, what's scary about this haunted house? The Hill House. Whenever we read Hill House, what's scary about that? Are there like any animals that are showing up in stories? Like, do we have any like attitudes about them? So horror, the environment comes up a whole lot in horror fiction. So always try to pay special attention to the setting, especially if it's out in nature or something like that. Maybe ask yourself, okay, well, what's going on with, what's the author trying to convey? Is the author trying to convey some kind of message, maybe? Okay, so the next one is called Formal Studies. All of you guys who take high school English, this is mostly what you do in high school English as a formal study. So tell me, you guys could tell me if this sounds familiar, but oftentimes, like if you do a formal study, you'll maybe look at a poem or something like that. You might break it down like, what's the symbolism in the poem, right? Or what's going on with the author's word choice, or what's going on with the rhyme in the poem, or meter in the poem. Not just poems, but fiction too. Whenever you use all these literature buzzwords, right? Symbolism, all of that kind of stuff. So whenever you think about what makes the work of literature a work of literature, what's all the little puzzle pieces in it that make it a piece of literature? Formal studies is what you do. So I will actually ask you guys to do an official formal study for your midterm. Right? A formal study is kind of what you do around then. But does that sound familiar to you guys? Does that sound like what high school literature is in a nutshell? You mostly talk about that kind of stuff, symbols and plot and setting and all that. I remember that's what it was like for me. What's your guys' high school English classes like? What kind of stuff do you guys talk about? Maybe especially some of you guys that are in high school, maybe elaborate here.
For me, it's been a lot of parts of speech, personification and trying to find all that stuff, and annotating usually some poems and stuff like that.
Right. And what you just described is exactly what I'm talking about. Right. And that's when you look at a piece of literature formally. Whenever we talk about the field of literature, different ones at different schools have been popular at different times. This one was especially popular in the 1950s, 1960s. It's kind of fallen out of fashion since then, but this was especially popular then, and it's popular in high schools for this exact same reason. Whenever you talk about a piece of literature formally, you mostly take the author out of it. You mostly take any sort of political message or whatever the literature has out of it too. And you just kind of look at the literature for what it is. So this was popular back in the 50s because, I don't know if you guys know from your history classes, but that was the age where McCarthyism, Senator Joseph McCarthy, this was the height of the Cold War with the United States and Russia. But this was a time period where Senator Joseph McCarthy was accusing almost everybody of being a communist. If he accused me of being a communist, that could ruin your life. Right? So he oftentimes got all these different people, summoned them into Congress, and pretty much just smeared their name and called them a communist, whether they were a communist or not. Right? People were afraid that he would besmear their names. Well, you guys all know the reputation of, especially of college professors and stuff. Like lots of people say, "Oh, we're very liberal, right? We're out to get you, right? We're out to indoctrinate you and make you all a bunch of communists." Right? So you've probably heard somebody say that about a college professor at some point, right? Well, that was exactly what they were afraid of back in the 50s. So whenever you talk about literature in a college classroom like in the 50s or 60s, it's mostly just this, because you didn't want to be accused of spreading left-wing ideas, right? So, which is valid because a lot of these schools of thought do have more of a left-wing spin to them, admittedly, right? So I'm not out to get you, just so you guys know. I never bring up my own political views in here. Hopefully you guys will never figure out what I think, because I will never bring it up. But gender studies is the next one. Gender studies and race studies. This one's especially a buzzword right now, because this one's especially ridiculed a lot right now. But whenever we have a gender and race study, let's take gender first. So whenever we're talking about gender in literature, you might take sort of what's called a feminist approach to lit. Like maybe you would look at how women are treated in lit, what types of attitudes and stereotypes about women are going on, especially if a male writer writes it. Or in horror fiction, women are often the victims. right? So what is going on about with that, perhaps? So we're actually going to read a lot of women writers in the class: Shirley Jackson, Mary Shelley, Flannery O'Connor. So, but we're also going to get women filtered through men too. So always kind of ask yourself, like, do you think these women characters are written well? Are they written like stereotypes, or are they written like real people? There's lots of discussion in literature about alternative sexualities besides just mainstream heterosexuality too. So whenever we talk about a work of literature, especially if you're talking about LGBTQ plus, right? You know, there's lots of discussion in literature that's they call it queer studies. So lots of English professors write about this kind of stuff. But whenever you have like gay themes in these literature texts, a lot of these texts, especially like the ones we're going to talk about, are from the 1800s. So back then, they didn't just come out and say it, right? That was something that was mostly kept in hidden, you know, behind private doors. So if something's going on where maybe there's some sexual tension between two characters of the same sex or something like that, oftentimes they will depict that in strange ways, right? So like maybe something's weird with the environment around the characters, right? That's oftentimes used to signify this type of thing. Or what kind of wording does the author use to describe them? Like oftentimes they'll describe it as like they have a great friendship, stuff like that. So whenever you use the word queer studies, that sounds like a nasty word, right? That's a nasty word that's used to describe gay people. But especially the professors who like to write about this, they like to use that word and turn a nasty word into kind of like an empowering word. That's why they use that term. But this is especially the study of alternative sexualities in literature. And it will come up in this class, especially when we talk about horror. Lots of times what's going on under the surface might be something like that is horrible, right? That you can't talk about openly. It will definitely come up when we talk about The Haunting of Hill House. This will definitely come up when we talk about that book. Okay, so definitely an important school of literary criticism, and certainly something that we're going to talk about in the horror class. And of course, there's also race studies. So the buzzword about this one right now in our current political environment is conservatives think that critical race theory is pretty much the boogeyman, right? You've probably heard somebody describe critical race theory in a disparaging way, right? I see it almost every day scrolling through my Facebook feed, right? All that critical race theory is it pretty much views race in the same way that gender or sexuality is viewed. So like you'll go back and you'll look at stuff like you'll look at literature and think about like what types of stereotypes, what types of attitudes do you have about different races, or certain races depicted as being monstrous or horrible in some type of way. If you notice a lot of this like racist stuff showing up in old literature, like how can we approach it? Like how can we look at it without just ignoring it? Right. So race will come up a lot in horror fiction too, right? Because maybe what's scary is another race, right? That oftentimes shows up, especially in 19th century fiction. So, but that's what critical race theory is. It pretty much just looks at all the discourses about race throughout history, and pretty much just ask the question: how can we make things better today than they were before? How do we not spread these harmful stereotypes about race? They also argue that race isn't just the color of your skin. Right? They argue that race is a social construct. Gender is also argued to be a social construct. So some people argue that gender isn't about what genitalia you have. Gender is an identity. So same thing is argued about race. So no matter where you fall in that spectrum, these are some sorts of debates that are going on today. And these are definitely hot button ways of looking at lit for sure. So yeah, we'll definitely bring this stuff up throughout the class. For example, when we read the short stories of H.P. Lovecraft in a few weeks, Lovecraft is one of the most brilliant original writers of all time. His fiction's very racist. You guys will be shocked at how racist his fiction is. Like he throws the N-word around like candy. So we'll definitely be talking a lot about this type of stuff throughout the semester. So it doesn't quite sound like the boogeyman, right? After I described it to you, it's just a very popular buzzword right now that's being used to disparage a certain type of academic study in the college. So the next one is influence studies. So if you're doing an influence study, you might ask yourself, how did one author influence another? How did one author influence another? So to do this, you kind of have to prove that the author actually read the other author. So maybe you might make a case like Poe's stories influenced Shirley Jackson's story. To do that, you kind of have to prove that Shirley Jackson actually had some type of interest in reading Poe. But if you can do that, these are oftentimes very interesting types of papers or discussions that you can come up with. I like to do that type of study myself. The last two, one of them here is a psychological study. You do a psychological study, you do what's called old school psychology. I don't know how much experience you guys have with psychology, but whenever we talk about psychology, there's two approaches to psychology. One is classic psychology. So whenever we talk about classic psychology, you look at stuff like Sigmund Freud's ideas, Jacques Lacan's ideas. They have all kinds of different ideas about like what makes people tick, what makes people abnormal, who display abnormal types of behaviors. So classic psychology is all about kind of like coming up with like what types of trauma do you have, how do you get better from it. Well, oftentimes you have to kind of come around and talk it out and figure out what's really disturbing you, what's making you act out this way. That's oftentimes the approach of classic psychology. But modern psychiatry, that's more about like, if you go to a psychiatrist, right, they're interested in the scientific way the brain works. So like maybe there's some chemical imbalances that's causing you to have problems like depression or anxiety or something like that. And then they give you a prescription for it. Like that's modern psychiatry. Modern psychology is you talk it out and you get to the root of your problems pretty much. The way that literature likes to handle it is the psychology approach. Right? They like to take these ideas from people like Freud or Lacan and maybe like break down a character. So like what's going on with this character? What's making a character act out this way? This will definitely be a tool that we will use a lot in this class whenever we talk about certain characters. So if you like psychology, you can definitely bring it into literature because these two disciplines are very much married together a lot of the time. I'll bring up some psychology stuff as it shows up. Like I might tell you guys like what's going on with Sigmund Freud psychology. Like I'll give you guys lots of like little snippets of information all throughout the course whenever it's relevant. The last one is a social, political, cultural study. Just so you guys know, this is what I think I'm the best at. So oftentimes my teaching will reflect a lot of this type of stuff. But I'm especially, along with English, I'm also love history. History is a subject that fascinates me too. So even my own writing and whatnot, I usually look at literature from a historical perspective. Like what's going on in the society at the time the literature was written. Like what types of debates were they having about certain things? Like in 19th century literature, when you talk about Poe and stuff, like they were talking about slavery a lot during this time. Like how does what's going on in America about something like slavery? How does that shape the story? This is looking at literature from a social and historical perspective. Oftentimes, if I'll introduce a work of literature to you guys, I'll oftentimes go over a little bit of like what's going on at that time period. What types of stuff were they arguing about? What types of stuff were they debating? What types of laws were being passed? So this is the one that I like to do. I'm very interested in literature and history. So my thesis that I did for my doctoral degree was actually about the medical profession in America in the 1800s. I looked at, there was all kinds of debates, like should you have to go to college to be a doctor or not? Should you have to get a license? Should you have to get a license to practice medicine? Like they were arguing about this stuff a lot in the 1800s. That's what I did my thesis on. So I was looking at like all these different books and like what types of attitudes were they showing about should doctors actually have to go to school to do it or not. There's all kinds of fiction about that back then. So this one's my favorite, but I'm a jack of all trades, so I try to bring out almost all of them as I can. So maybe one of you guys, maybe your mind will naturally gravitate to one of these the further throughout the semester we go. Maybe you guys will find that you're more interested in certain ones than others. This is all kinds of different ways to look at lit. Okay? So that's a little overview of literary studies. You can take a whole class where you learn all about all these in a lot of depth. This is your basic Spark Notes version of all these different schools. I'll ask you guys real quick. Do you guys think you'll find one of these types of ways of looking at lit more interesting than others? Like, are some of you guys like, yeah, I'd really like the psychology way, or I would really like the history way, right? Some of you guys have a gut feeling you'll probably like one way more than another. Especially if you're interested in a subject like psychology or history or something like that.
I would probably choose the psychiatry one, the psychology one, just because I like to know what they're thinking and how they're feeling.
Right. Yeah, that one's especially popular. I mean, just think about even right now, like think about like how popular the true crime genre is. Like so many people are interested in like serial killers and
Well, that's all that plays on in my house.
what was going on through their heads and what made them that way and all that stuff.
When I first started into nursing, I was a psychiatric nurse for 2.5 years, and I loved every minute of it.
I'm sure you saw some lots of interesting stuff, to say the least.
Some very wild stuff. Very wild stuff.
Yeah, there's always, it feels like there's a new documentary about Ted Bundy every day, right? Like,
yeah, some kind of serial killer.
Yeah, I might mix it up a little bit, right? Ted Bundy wasn't the only person who killed somebody, right?
Yeah, I've read almost all the books that I can find on serial killers, and I've watched almost every documentary I can find on serial killers because I just like the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, me too.
You guys like that stuff too?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ed Gein was the weirdest serial killer of all. I don't think anybody will ever be weirder than him. He's the guy that they made the movie Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre off of.
Yeah, that was wild.
he's by far the creepiest one. Good. Let's segue over then. Let's talk about some bloody murder and some of these stories that we read for today. Okay, so ham-handed and transition. So let's talk about the Poe stories. We'll especially dive deep in the Black Hat and Hell Hill Heart. All these stories. Did any of you guys notice that all these stories tied together in some way? Yeah, I see you shaking your head there, Jessica. I'll get back to you, Jessica, here in a second. You can tell me all about it. But they all tie together in some way in terms of like the themes of the story. And whenever we use the word theme, we have to ask ourselves, like, what types of ideas is the literature talking about? Like, what's the main message of the lit? That's what a theme is. But before we dive into the story specifically, I just want to kind of have like a little round table discussion about Edgar Allan Poe. Like, I'm sure all of you probably read at least one Poe story in your life at some point at school. What's your guys' experiences with Poe? What kinds of stuff have you read? Do you like Poe, or maybe you're not familiar much with him? You guys all chime in and tell me like what types of experiences have you had with reading him before?
I used to read it in middle school. We had this whole like project over like reading Edgar Allan Poe. We read like Telltale Heart, and like I'm pretty sure we went over Black Cat too, just like briefly. Like they were trying to censor it a lot because that's kind of like what middle school does. They're like they don't want to get too disturbing and everything. But overall, I liked Edgar Allan Poe. He's just seems a little crazy, seems a little off. Something's off about him.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Who said he's weird?
Me. I think he's a little odd.
How so? Just the stuff he comes up with?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very murderous.
Yeah, he always. Yeah, that's it.
live. He always writes about like psychos, like people trying to kill
Deranged.
people.
Right, if you guys have ever thought about murdering somebody in your life, right, you come up with some ideas this week, right? Hide somebody in the wall, right? Put them under the floorboard, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
He shows a lot of guilt, like the character is feeling guilty.
I think he may have a bit of alcohol problems.
I agree.
He rationalizes a lot of his killings also.
Now, the black cat, alcohol comes up in that story, as we'll talk about in a second, right? The narrator's like, I drink a lot, right? That's what causes me to be so violent, right? Is my alcohol. We'll talk about why Poe throws that kind of stuff in there, right? But he often throws that type of detail in there to maybe throw you off a bit. Can you guys think of titles you've read before? I know Mackenzie said Telltale Heart and Black Cat in middle school.
That we've read.
What's the one Carrie always?
Is there one about a raven or something? What's that one called?
That's the one we read in middle
There's
school.
also one that's like Hop Frog. We read Hop Frog in our English teacher, like a junior year, her class. It was Hop Frog.
The Raven is the one.
I'm
That's like
thinking
his
yeah.
really famous one. We read that.
Annabelle Lee.
Raven, Annabelle Lee. Those are his two most famous poems.
Mhm.
We're going to read those for the early week post next week. So, and yeah, we're going to cover those early next week. There's a bunch of other famous ones. The Pit and the Pendulum, Mask of the Red Death. Maybe some of the ones next week that we're going to cover, maybe, I don't think you guys might have encountered before. He wrote a lot of horror stories, weird gothic stories, but he also innovated detective stories as well. That might not be something, that's something you guys might not know, but he actually helped pioneer like the detective story. So he wrote detective stories before Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories. So Poe was actually the first innovator, one of the first innovators of that type of story too. Like there's some mystery and you got to figure, the detective figures out like what the mystery is. So he helped invent the mystery genre just as much as he helped invent the horror genre. So that's something that's interesting about him. One of his great detective stories is named The Purloined Letter. The Purloined Letter is one of his most famous detective stories. Yeah, well, you read a lot of poetry, a lot of short fiction, a lot of detective stories. Poe was writing in the 1820s through the 1840s, but he was one of the very first American writers to actually make a living doing nothing but writing. Like most other writers back then, you didn't make a living selling books. Right, that was something you did on your own time for the most part. You didn't really make a living in early America selling books. He was one of the first people to do it. For the most part, writers had a day job back then. They just wrote for fun. They might have sold some books, but they probably didn't make a lot of money off of it. Back in his day, pirating of books was a big thing. So oftentimes what would happen, the British books were cheaper to get a hold of. So stuff like Charles Dickens novels and all that, they were cheaper to get a hold of because they pirated them. So and in turn, American writers from here, people didn't buy their books because their books costed money because of copyright, whereas they pirated a lot of that British stuff. So Americans have always been filthy pirates, right? When it comes to consuming their media, right? So think about that next time you download a song illegally or something, right? We just know we've always done it, right? Not to encourage bad behavior, right? But yeah, it sounds like you guys all have encountered them before. Usually in this class, I usually get at least one person who's super hardcore into it, right? Maybe even more so than myself. But show yourself if you're that person, right? But I usually have at least one who's super hardcore into them.
I'm pretty big into him. I've been to his house and his gravesite in Baltimore.
How was that? I've never been.
Oh, it was beautiful. It was really great. I loved it.
Yeah, he's got a museum in Richmond too. I know Richmond has a Poe museum. That's a place I've always wanted to go to. Lots of different cities try to lay claim to him. Philadelphia tries to lay claim to him, like, because I think that's where he actually passed away. But Baltimore, he lived there for a while. Richmond, he lived there for a while. So he kind of floated back and forth. What other stories have you read from him? Is there any that I didn't name that you've read before?
No, just the Raven and the Telltale Heart and the Black Cat. That's really it.
Especially next week, you'll encounter a bunch more of his stuff. Good. Let's dive into the actual stories then and try to make some sense of them. Black Cat is always my favorite of the lot. Like that, the ones that I gave you for today. That one's mine. But if we break down the Black Cat, at its heart, it's a story about, like, why do people do these things? Like, why do people commit these acts of violence and things like that? So one thing that's interesting about Poe, this is something, because we're reading him first, this is something you guys might not know. One thing that's interesting about him is he was one of the first ever writers to write about these criminals and things like that, but write about them through their perspective. So Poe uses a first person perspective to tell his stories. He tells the stories through the eyes of the madman, right? So before this, other types of writers, they mostly told their stories with a narrator, right? The narrator would tell the story. The narrator would tell you everything that's going on through the character's head, right? That's a third person narrator. That's by far more common. We're going to read a bunch of third person narrators in this class. Poe was the first person to tell a story through a first person point of view, right? He told it through the eyes of these madmen. And what happened with that was, as you read, you can't really rely on the narrator to tell you the truth as far as what's happening, because you only get that narrator's perspective. Maybe the truth is something completely different, right? But what we get is the narrator's point of view, and we don't get the whole truth whenever we read the story through their perspective. And that's something that comes up with Black Cat for sure. We can, as we kind of go through the story, we kind of have to ask ourselves, even, like, what's real? What might just be this guy's imagination, right? But this is definitely a legitimate question to ask ourselves as we go through it. But as we mentioned a second ago, he likes to blame his alcohol issues for most of his problems. You turn to the story in our book, you'll read a passage out of my version of the book. I gave you guys all a PDF copy. I have a whole book of his stories here. Black cat real quick. Yeah, so pretty early in the story, he has this whole paragraph about this was the first time that this cat appears, and this is when he first starts acting especially violently. Let's see where I have all this stuff marked. Let's see. So pretty early in the story, there's a paragraph that starts with our friendship lasted in this manner for several years. I don't know if you guys are following along with your own screens or whatever, but this is the paragraph that I'm looking at. But here is how he kind of sets up these narrators, especially as being unreliable. You can't really trust them to tell the truth. He says, our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length, even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. You kind of like ask a WTF question in the middle of that, like, why has he got a pet monkey, right? Right? But this is especially an important passage early on because he's almost showing you, like, can you rely on him to tell the truth? Is he drunk? Is he maybe imagining things the further we go? But if you look a couple paragraphs down below that, you also kind of start getting the main idea of the story. I'm especially interested to hear what you guys have to say about this after I introduce it. But he introduces this idea called perverseness in the story. And this shows up too in the Telltale Heart. And it's the whole idea of the Emperor Perverse is this idea that he comes up with called perverseness. But if you look at the middle of the paragraph that starts with, in the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. If you look at about the middle of that paragraph, he said, this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account, yet I not make sure that my soul lives, that I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who is not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse of my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. So here's the main idea of almost all three of these stories, right? This idea of perverseness, right? Poe's comes to this sort of thesis, right, that we all do things. We all do things that are wrong. We all think things that are wrong. We know it's not logical to think these things or even do these things. We do them because of this almost like sort of morbid curiosity we have, right? We know it's bad. We know it's wrong to think something or do something, but we do it anyway, right? It's a thrill almost. The Emperor of the Perverse, he talks about the whole first part of that story is he's kind of theorizing this idea too, right? He says, this is, now we're talking about first day material, we're getting ready to get real morbid here, right? But he talks about how like he can stand at the edge of a cliff, right, in the Perverse, and how he kind of imagines that he's getting ready to, what would it be like if I jumped, right? What would happen if I jumped, right? He says that everybody, most all people have this kind of thought at some point, like what would happen if I jumped? Like what would be different? He's kind of sit there and look at the edge of the cliff and think about like, and kind of fantasize like what would happen if I jumped. That's this idea called perverseness that he talks about here. What do you guys think of this idea? You guys think that this is true? You guys think that maybe he's taking it a little too far, right? So what's your guys' opinions?
I think it is somewhat true, but I really think that he does take it too far.
Right.
It's one thing to wonder, and then it's another thing to act on it.
Right. So what types of things would you say most people wonder about without acting necessarily?
One of the things will be probably how it would feel to kill someone.
Right. We've all fantasized about it at some point, right? I'd like to wring that person's neck, right? What do some of the rest of you all think about that? This idea that we're all somewhat perverse, our human nature is somewhat perverse. You guys
Would you put it into like, I don't know, would you put it into like, say someone has thoughts of jumping, would you put that somehow into like mental illness in a way?
Yeah, I mean, definitely if you've got suicidal thoughts, right, there's probably something wrong mentally, right? But he argues here that most everybody who's ever stood at the edge of a cliff, right, thinks about that. Like, what would it be like if I jumped? So it doesn't matter if you're mentally ill or not, right? He argues that everybody has this notion that it's not just sickness, but it's something that's part of everybody. What do you think about that, Audrey? You think he's right, or do you think it's
I guess you're right in that aspect. I'm wondering though, when he wrote the imp of perverse, was this coming from him or was this coming from another person? Like how you had said he was writing from the minds of criminals. Is this coming from his mind or is this coming from someone else?
Are you talking about the character of the story or Poe himself?
How you were talking about how in the Black Cat, or not in the Black Cat, but just overall, he would write, like how you said how a narrator would talk out a story of someone doing something, you put it into the mind, or he put it into the mind of them.
Mhm.
Is this also coming from a character he's making up, or is this coming from his own thoughts?
I think this is the case. You could probably make the argument it's coming from his own thoughts, right? Just for the simple reason, here's 3 stories that all have this idea, right? So this is something that he's definitely seems to have theorized himself, that he's maybe putting into these characters' minds. Yeah, I think you can definitely make the argument this is something he came up with just because it happens in all 3 stories. What other rest of you guys think? Do you think this is true of most people? You think it's too, think he's overthinking it, maybe too morbid?
I just wonder if he thinks that everybody is as sick and twisted as his mind is. And that's why he said maybe he thinks that everybody's mind works the way his does.
Right.
I think there comes a point where like everybody thinks of doing the wrong thing, and sometimes people do the wrong thing even though that they know it's bad or they know that they shouldn't do it. So like hey, robbing a bank or something, but they're gonna still do it anyways.
Yeah.
I think that's like a self-control thing. I'm like he obviously, or the characters that he wrote about, there was like something that like it's like they didn't have self-control or whatever.
They didn't have a little voice in the back of your head saying, "Don't do this."
It's like a conscience.
Right. Maybe we all have these faults, right? But our self-control is what keeps us from doing them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the mental illness that comes into play when we lose that self-control, perhaps. Yeah, so you could probably extend this idea even to something that's not so awful. Maybe like if you smoke cigarettes or something, right? You know it's bad, but you do it anyway, right? You know it's bad for you. You know it's probably going to give you cancer, right? But you still do it anyway.
Yeah.
You can even apply that idea to something like that too. You know alcohol is bad. You know it's going to make you crazy. You know it takes away your inhibition. But you still like to get drunk. Same kind of deal here. Yeah.
Hey, killing people.
I see you nodding over there. Right? You know what I'm talking about. Somebody say killing people. Somebody just say that.
Yeah, it's addictive.
You don't know this from experience, do you, Gabe?
Hey, I've been reading these stories. I know how to hide these bodies.
Question.
But, yeah, I mean, anytime you see a serial killer, right? Usually they can't stop. They continue doing it. Like getting away with it once or twice isn't enough. They have to keep doing it. It's a thrill. They like the danger of being caught. I've always liked that show. You guys watching Dexter in here? Show Dexter. It was on a few years ago. It just had a reboot season on past couple of months. That's a good show. That gives you like through the killer's eyes or whatever. You like that kind of thing. Yeah, you guys are being kind of cagey here, right? But it seems like I'm getting the sense that most of y'all think he's right. Maybe not to that extent, but most of y'all seem to think he's right. We all have these thoughts. We don't act on them. We all have these thoughts. That's the general consensus I seem to be getting from all of you here. What would it be like if I stole something from a store? Right? What could I get away with it?
What are you stealing?
Yeah, what are you stealing? And from where?
What am I stealing?
Yeah, from where?
I don't know. Maybe even just like what would it be like if I just like stole this pack of candy or something, right? In the checkout line, right?
You might get away with it.
Just gotta hide that in your pocket. You're good.
Yeah, you might get away with that. You might feel
Roll it
bad.
up your sleeve, something like that.
Right, some people get a thrill while shoplifting. Some people are like millionaires, but they'll still go shoplift just for the thrill. Right?
Wouldn't that kind of be like the feeling people get when they like ride roller coasters, like adrenaline?
Yeah, the
coming?
adrenaline.
What'd you say again?
I said like wouldn't that kind of be like similar to like when people ride roller coasters or like anything that gives them adrenaline?
Right. Yeah, they like that adrenaline rush. Yeah, I know that you guys might know the actress Winona Ryder, right? But back in the early 2000s, she got arrested a couple of times for shoplifting. Yeah, Jess, I see you nodding your head there, Jessica. You remember that? Yeah.
I do remember that. Everyone was so shocked.
I mean, she's made a comeback because she's the mom on Stranger Things. But she's made a comeback in recent years. But for a while, her career kind of fell apart because of all that stuff she was shoplifting. She had millions of dollars, right? She still got a thrill going in the store and running off with something. So and I did not encourage thievery. My car was stolen a couple of years ago. I did not encourage thievery. Remember, it was on Memorial Day a couple of years ago. I walked outside my house and my car wasn't there. I was like, what? And so some guy stole it and they found it a week later. Some guy stole it. Like they made my car like super gangster. Like they painted the rims on the car gold. They painted my dashboard red, right? I looked like I was low riding it through Beckley here, right, for a couple of weeks. So
What kind of car was it?
it was just this Toyota Corolla. That's what I had at the time.
Gangster Toyota Corolla.
And it was. I was the coolest guy in town there for a little while. I was waiting to get it fixed. So
Did you have the fuzzy dice on like the window or
The
the
pimp
rearview
dice.
mirror?
Fuzzy dice.
Pimp dice.
yeah, he
You have
even
like the fluffy steering wheel.
yeah, he even painted the inside of the engine, the cover to the engine. He painted it gold. Like even my engine was spray painted. So I was pretty gangster there for a while. So you see this like gangster car drive up the street, and then this big nerd gets out of the car, right? You're like, what? So, yeah, clearly this guy had the perverse behavior, right? He didn't have the impulse control, right? I don't know what was so compelling about my Toyota Corolla, but such is life. Yeah, then several months later, I was just sitting in my house. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. It sounded like something exploded outside. Some drunk driver like came up the street and like just plowed into my parked car and completely destroyed it. And that was after I got it fixed. So,
Can relate.
This was the same Toyota?
Same Toyota, yeah. 7 months.
I just get rid of that thing. I just get rid of that, man. It's bad luck.
I can literally broke after this food.
Something like that happened to you?
Well, it wasn't someone else's fault. It was mine.
You was joyriding and crashed into somebody's car, did you?
I want to say it was a car.
More like a mountain.
Or like the earth. The earth. Aaliyah, yours was an animal.
Mine was a deer.
Mine was a hillside, and yours was a deer.
Mine was a gas pump.
Bailey, you're next.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, this was at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember I heard it and I looked out the window and there was like my car destroyed. Like I ran outside my house in like a robe. I was shaking my fist like an old man, right? Whoever hit my car got away in a getaway vehicle. I was like shaking my fist like an old man, right? So,
I just got out and stood there. Waited till everybody came and like saw me. Like, no, I didn't cry actually.
yeah, I got rid of it for a Jeep, so you know, I'm living the Jeep life now.
Parents bought me a Camry.
Has anything crazy happened to that car yet?
Or what is it?
I said, has anything crazy happened to that car yet?
No. It's like that car had a curse on it or something. So.
Yeah, you got rid of the curse.
Yeah.
I think that is a win.
Also, that car, before it got hit, I had a crazy neighbor who kicked it.
Nope.
He got mad at me, so he kicked it. So yeah, 3 incidents with that car.
Why did I get mad at you?
Was he a former student?
No, he was just secretly mentally unstable. And something happened with him and the landlord, and he thought I was being a tattletale or something. So he just went out and kicked my car.
Oh God, someone came and kicked mine.
Yeah.
Did you like see it, or did he just do it like anonymously, like went up when nobody was looking and kicked it?
Oh,
Thought that'd really get you.
I was sitting at my desk one evening reading some papers, and suddenly I just heard this loud kicking noise, and I looked out the window, and there he was out there going to town.
Dude, what did you just walk outside and saw someone kicking your car? What was he trying to do? I think, what are you accomplishing?
But this guy was a lot bigger and badder than me too, so I wasn't going to go out there and fight him over it. So.
I think you should have.
I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference with my car. It's a little banged
I
up.
would have just hung out the window and said, "Stop that! Stop! Stop kicking my car!"
Depends on what car it is. If it was the red one, I probably should let it happen.
I remember I shouted out the window like, "What are you doing, you crazy?" You know, I was using the potty mouth.
Hurry up.
the spirit of perverseness. Definitely part of living in Beckley. You guys are right to live out in the more rural areas. Beckley here is a crazy place to live.
You've obviously not been up to date on what's happening in Mingo County.
What all's going on down there?
It's actually mostly drug arrests, mostly, but it's the ones that's on meth. So it's always the ones that you really feel sorry for because they're on meth, but you can't help to laugh at them because, I mean, what else are you going to do? It's everywhere. It is.
Right. Yeah, the meth definitely takes away people's inhibitions, right? So they do all kinds of crazy stuff when they get strung out on that. Like I saw some like high-speed car chase on YouTube that happened like not long ago. Yeah.
Yes, that actually came by my house.
Yeah.
We have a set of neighbors that actually do meth, and it'll be like 2 o'clock in the morning and they'll be out there revving up their engines and being really loud, and you're like, oh my God, what are you doing?
Yeah, they don't have much of a filter, so yeah, they could be the ones telling this story, right? They could be like, you know what, I was doing the math, it made me kill this cat, gave me some guilt. But to just real quickly get back to the story, I'll let you guys go here in just a couple minutes. Just to real quickly get back to the story, here's a question for you all. The further we go through the story, do you guys think some of this stuff actually happened? Like there's actually a debate. The second cat that comes around, there's actually a debate that cat actually wasn't real. Some people think this was just a figment of this guy's imagination. Right? He saw this second cat, and it has a mark on it that looks like the mark of the gallows. So it looks like the mark of him getting ready to hang, right, for his crimes. So there's lots of debate about the story that second cat really didn't even exist. He doesn't even find it until he breaks down the wall, and it's in there alive with his dead wife that he axe murders, right? That he tries to bury on the wall. But all right, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that cat was real the further we went through the story, the second one? Or you think this was just a figment of his guilt?
I think it was a figment of his guilt, because that kind of correlates to like Telltale Heart, when he thought he could hear the heartbeat through the floors and everything. Like I feel like that's how the cat is, because it had like like you said, the gallows, or he hung the other cat. It just seems to all relate to one another, like just guilt ridden and just going crazy about it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's missing an eye too, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah,
It was missing the same eye.
It was the same eye.
The same eye.
Did it say he found the cat and it was missing the eye, or was it that the cat he was missing an eye like a day later or a day after he found it? I can't remember. Like really remember.
From what the book that we got, the PDF we got, he didn't notice until he had got it home, and his wife had taken a liking to it, that it actually had the same missing eye.
Right. If you remember, he blinded the first cat when he mistreated it, right? So another interesting detail, like what's the chances, right, that the cat would be missing the same eye?
I think that cat is the spirit of the other cat. Like, it's like a figment of his imagination. And that's that cat coming back to haunt him.
Yeah, I think that's a legit view of looking at the story, right? And this was the cat maybe coming back for some revenge, maybe. Yeah, some people view it literally, some people view it figuratively, right? Maybe the cat wasn't real, maybe it was, right? It's all up for interpretation, right? We will not. It's just up for us to decide. That's one thing that people say makes great literature, right? Great literature makes us ask these questions. Like great literature oftentimes doesn't have a straightforward ending. It makes us ask and debate these kinds of questions. So oftentimes in this class, you guys will find we will not get a conclusive ending most of the time. Like most of the time, you'll be left scratching your head, wondering what happened. So such will be your experience in this class. Yeah, you mentioned the telltale heart too, right? The same exact thing going on in that story. Here's the heart beating beneath the floorboard. We know no one else is hearing it. It's just him hearing it. Right, so maybe like a manifestation of his own guilt.
Yeah, kind of like his guilt drawing him to like confess in a way. Like it's just playing over and over again in his mind, just like gotta confess, basically. Or like I don't know. I kind of feel like in Black Cat, he wanted them to know because he was talking about like the wall, like look how good this wall is, like plastered up and everything. Like he kind of was guilty, but at the same time wanted them to figure it out. I'm not.
Right, he kind of wanted to gloat about it, even, right? Like, he's trying to like, oh, look here at this wall, right? Nice wall, right?
That kind of goes with the perverseness because it's like doing things that you know are bad, but at the same time he got away with like kind of the perfect crime. Like he wanted them to kind of realize his like crime.
The same thing with the floorboards, right? Like he was doing these like little subtle gestures towards the floorboards as he was feeling guilty about that as well. In many ways, the Telltale Heart's a more weird story than even the Black Cat. The Telltale Heart, this guy he kind of just fixates on things. The narrator does. Like he really hates this guy's like glass eye, right? He fixates on his little glass eye to the point that he just it just makes him want to kill. My favorite part of that whole story is when like they're in complete darkness, but he's just like shining a little light in the room just so he can like see the guy's glass eye and fixate on it. Right? That's always a fun, creepy little passage. We've all done that at some point or other, right? We've like, look, that person's mole is killing me, right? Like we've all done that at some point, right?
I think he was a little too obsessed with that eye. Just a little bit.
Just a little. It borders on unhealthy a little bit, right?
Yeah. Killed the man over his glass eye. He couldn't help it.
He was a pretty chill old man too, right? They got along. It was just the eye that drove.
Well, he even said he loved it.
What'd you say there, Jordan?
He even said he loved him.
Right.
I keep finding all these parallels. Like it's kind of like the cat too. He says he loved the cat and they had a good relationship. Just that one thing that ticked him off to the point where he wanted to hurt them or murder them or just cause them ill will.
Yeah, the cat wanted to rub on his leg and stuff, right, when he was feeling violence. So that's what made him treat the cat bad, right? Because the cat actually showed affection to him.
Well, the second cat in the story said that he got between his legs and tripped him up, and that's why he ended up killing his wife, because his wife tried to stop him from killing the cat.
Right? That moment of like that momentary rage, right? That sometimes feel like when something like that happens. Right?
Does she not care that he's killing all these animals? She just don't care.
I don't know. Maybe I guess she thinks, well, if I run, right, where am I going to go? Right? This guy's crazy. He'll probably find me, right?
Yeah.
But also, if she's in an abusive relationship, which she was, maybe she thinks, well, if he's taking it out on the animals, he's not taking it out on me.
Yeah, I think it's crazy how he would read their past, like the love for animals and how they had all the pets and everything, yet he's taken this like turn for the worst of like abusing the cat and just being mean overall, and then ended up killing his wife. I think that's just wild. Because he like, he's thinking of like the good things, like the good moments where he loved animals and probably loved his wife and everything, but still does that.
It raises the question, why do they, I still raise the question, why a pet monkey? What did the poor monkey have to go through? I wonder, right? We know about the cat. What about the poor monkey? It's a hard story to read, especially if you're an animal lover. It's definitely a little bit of a hard story to read, for sure. Yeah, I know that. And how do you, Paige? You said you're an animal lover, right? Yeah, so I bet it wasn't an easy one for you to read with your 10 cats, right?
No, I cried. Yeah, it was ugly.
Yeah.
I like the story though.
Yeah, my cat is sitting here glaring at me. What don't you think about it? Right.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to see the cat?
Unfortunately, I'm using my desktop computer, so I can't really move the camera around. She's over here sitting on the bed, taking it all in.
The cat could be on the beach with the waves in the back.
Yeah.
What's its name?
Franny. Franny's her name.
Oh, that's cute.
Is your full name Francis?
No, she was just named. She's just named Franny. I sometimes call her Francesca, and I sometimes call her that. She's a very chubby old lady. She's very grumpy. So, she won't let me have any other cats. She tries to beat them up if another cat's even close. So she's very territorial.
You probably got one of them hairless cats, don't you?
No, she's just a plain old tabby cat.
Oh, okay. That's kind of
Golly. I don't like hairless cats, man. They freak me out.
I think careless cats are pretty cool.
I'm with you, Gabe. I believe they freak me out too. Something's just unnerving about them.
Just don't look right. Something wrong with them. Well, the hairless, that's what's wrong with them.
Persian cats weird me out too.
What kind of cat is your cat?
Just a plain old tabby cat.
That's all right, man. I got like oh, my bad.
Or go ahead. Go ahead.
It's not that important.
Yeah, this was a very good first day. We have a pretty good time here. So this is a class where we can all kind of hang out, have some fun. It definitely beats writing a big long post every week, right? So next week, let me just double check real quick the stories we got on the table for next week. I know early in the week next week we're doing the poems, so we're going to do Raven and Annabelle Lee. Let's see. I think that's what I've got on there. Yep, Raven and Annabelle Lee early next week. So every week everybody's got to do the early week response. That's a little bit of a shorter one. So this week's was Sleepy Hollow. So I'll read those over the weekend. Maybe send you guys a grade back on them, so you'll see how you did. But early next week, respond to the Raven and Annabelle Lee. Those won't take you 10 minutes to read. I'll even post like a little for the Raven. I'll even post like a very dramatic reading of it that you guys can listen to. It's really fun to listen to. So I'll even post that for you on our page. Then next Thursday night, we're going to read a couple of other ones. The Pin and the Pendulum, Mask of the Red Death, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. You guys, some of you guys in here like medicine, you'll really like The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. That's a really bizarre story about yeah, you'll find out. I'm not going to spoil it. If you like medicine, that's one of his really freaky ones. So, yeah, he was very much interested in writing about medicine. So, Mask of the Red Death is about a plague. So that's a really interesting story to read during the COVID times that we're living in too, like Mask of the Red Death. So we'll see you guys next week then. Take care. Y'all have a good weekend.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Goodbye.